Welcome to the Odd Ones Out podcast. If you ever feel like you're on the outside looking in, you are not alone. Let's challenge our limiting beliefs and embrace who we truly are. Hello, it's Becky and Maz back with Odd Ones Out. And this, right at the beginning of the podcast series, we are exploring root convictions that drive behaviours and ultimately pretty much fulfill those limiting beliefs that set us up for a fall, that mean that life isn't as great as it could be, or that we just don't feel ourselves, hence the whole Odd Ones Out.
Yeah.
If you didn't catch the previous episode, which is me talking about my root conviction of not feeling good enough, go ahead and listen. Not right now, because I have something in store for you that you're going to want to pay attention to. But do go ahead and have a listen, and it would be great to hear your thoughts on it. But we are taking it in turns for these first couple of podcasts, episodes, to go into detail to kind of set the scene, if you like. So as the title's hinting at, this is about Maz, and you're going to be talking us through this whole sense of not belonging. And, and I do wonder if this one's actually going to resonate with quite a few people.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I kind of alluded to in our previous podcast, it was quite difficult for me to really hone in on exactly what I consider to be my kind of root conviction, or at least the root conviction that drives some of the sort of self-defeating behaviour that I might have. But I think this sense of not belonging is really a big thing for me, and it shows itself in all sorts of different ways. And as somebody who's probably more than most people, I tend to self-analyze quite a bit. I overthink about.
You don't.
I do. Well, these lovely people might not realise, but I do.
Sorry.
I do spend a lot of my time thinking about these things. So it's not that the feelings are new to me at all, but trying to kind of condense it into a sort of a core belief or a root conviction took some doing. But I can certainly look back and sort of, I would say that sense of not belonging is something that I definitely felt in childhood and has always been with me. And it's sometimes it's been sort of fairly dormant. Other times it's featured very heavily, depending on how stressful life is or what happens to be going on at the time. But no, its genesis is definitely in childhood. And my childhood is perhaps a little bit different because I'm half Iraqi. My father's from Iraq. My mother was English. And I spent the first 12 years of my life living in Iraq, in Baghdad. And I think for the most part, it was a very happy childhood. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have had parents who were supportive, who gave me enough of what I needed, I'd say. But there wasn't a particular emphasis on expressing your feelings, emotional health, really. And there were a few things that went on when I was a child, particularly going to an Iraqi school, for example. I can remember vividly not fitting in immediately because I didn't look particularly Iraqi and I was bullied a lot. I stood out a lot. And
but also, weren't you speaking English at home and you didn't even understand Arabic when you went for your first day? Something?
That's right. Yeah. So I was up against it a little bit. And I think the one thing I probably lacked going to school and going through those experiences is a sense of robustness. Maybe I was quite what's a nice way to put it? Naive child. I was very much in my own head a lot of the time, daydreaming, enjoying my own company. And then it was intruded on by school, and all of these things came in, and I found it difficult to adjust. I ultimately made friends and sort of got on with my peers pretty well, but I think that sense of standing out and not really being able to own it, I think that's the crucial thing. That at various points of my life, that sense of not belonging has featured. But I think if I'd have been able to reframe it when I was younger, it would have certainly helped. But I just experienced it as a negative thing, a wholly negative thing. So being half English in an Iraqi school was a bad thing. Being sensitive, I'd say probably a particularly sensitive person. You know, I'm very in touch with my feelings, and sometimes to my detriment, in touch with everyone else's. So I pick up on how other people are feeling, and it's
proper empath.
it's difficult to get away from. And I think because that was such a feature of who I was growing up, and there was obviously, we were talking about Iraq in the 1980s. There was a war going on every 5 minutes. You know, there was always stress and turmoil, and add that to my experiences in school and not fitting in, and I sort of felt that my reactions were they were just difficult to deal with, and I didn't really know what to do with it. I didn't have an outlet, and it seemed like my peers, even other family members, were coping with it in a different way. They seemed to be carrying on that whole keep calm and carry on thing. And I felt differently, and I just didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to express it. So that continued for a while. And then after the Gulf War in 91, we moved over to the UK to live in the south of England. And I experienced the same thing, but kind of in reverse. So although I looked the part, I looked English enough, it was a culture shock. And I was coming into school in England when I was, 12, 13. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to behave. The way the other kids behaved was so different to what I was used to in Iraq. It was just a big learning curve, and add to that the difficulties my parents were going through at the time, adjusting to life over here, finding jobs, coming to terms with, especially Dad coming to terms with leaving his family in Iraq, because it all happened relatively quickly, suddenly. That sense of displacement and not belonging continued. And I think at that point, a part of me, the sensitive part of me, kind of shut down. And I didn't really, it just seemed like it wasn't a prospect for me to be able to own that side of me and to do something with it, because the bullying continued. And I reacted by closing myself off quite a bit and throwing myself into schoolwork, for example. So I spent hours and hours and hours doing way more than I needed to, because it was a focus, and it was something I could do on automatic pilot. You know, academically, I was okay. I always did well in Iraq and in England, so it was something I was good at. So I just did it to death, really. And all that time, throughout my teenage years, that sort of emotional part of me, which is such a feature of who I am, was not growing.
Was it not growing because it hurt to have it there? Because I'm listening and I'm hearing that your sense of not belonging, in a way, was validated by those little bastards that bullied you in Iraq for being half English, and in England for being half Iraqi, and for what those kind of traits brought to the fore. So I completely understand the not having that sense of belonging. So did the shutting down of the emotional side, that sensitivity, was it just to protect you from feeling hurt?
I think so, and I think it's all about timing as well, because obviously this was happening as I was becoming a teenager, so there's all the baggage that comes with that as well. And I have always been quite an introvert too. I mean, I think I'm a very sociable introvert, but again, growing up in the family I did, most of my family are introverts. Most of them are can be a little bit socially awkward. So it all added up to, when I came up against those roadblocks, eventually the toll was too much, and I just figured, not that it was conscious, but I figured that the best thing to do would be to just keep going. That was my kind of coping phase, if you like. Keep going and achieve what I could achieve at school, go on to university, get a degree, and hopefully some of it would just work itself out. But I think I hadn't really quite realised how insidious that lack of belonging was, because all of that time, I mean, even in the UK, when nobody would have thought anything of the way I looked, for example, because I look pretty white English, really, and I'm tall, for example, so I kind of fit in more in the sort of the Anglo-Saxon mould. But all the time, I felt much more Iraqi than I did English, because that was my culture. That's where I grew up. But I had no way of expressing it. I didn't really have, at that point anyway, I didn't really have a lot of Iraqi family over here. My dad, who was my link to Iraq, had pretty much coped with our living over in the UK by shutting that side of him down. It was too painful for him. But it meant I didn't really have a way of maintaining my Iraqi side, and to all intents and purposes, everyone else ignored it or didn't even know it was there. So I think that was definitely an ever-present in my mind, and it just stayed with me. And I kept making the same kind of mistakes. So from school, I then went straight into university when I really needed to take some time out and to address this. But by that point, my conviction was that I had to keep doing what I was good at. I had to keep achieving. And if I got a good enough degree, it's mad the way you think in these situations. But if I got a good enough degree that somehow I'd fall into a good job, and life would just take care of itself. And perhaps I'd fall in line with other people I saw who coped by being relatively unemotional and hiding their feelings. But all along, I felt I knew I was different, and I just I didn't have some people will happen to have a role model or somebody who they can kind of go, oh, they're different, they're confident with it, they can do something with it. I didn't really have that. So it just got buried, and it's only been in the last, I'd say probably 10 years or so, that it's come more to the fore, and I've probably been a bit more able to bring that side of me out. But it's incredibly hard. It still is.
But how did you identify that feeling of not belonging is your root conviction? Like, because obviously we've talked before about the way kind of things kind of leak out. So I've already hinted that one of my things is a food addiction of not being good enough. How would you explain how your lack of belonging leaks out? The kind of what does it drive? How does it manifest to the point where you are now in a place where addressing that not feeling like you belonging is paramount?
Well, this is the problem. I wouldn't say it's paramount, but I think it would be helpful for me to do that, and it's important for me to do that, because ultimately being authentically myself is crucial.
Yeah.
I think, I suppose, the main way it's shown itself over the years is the lack of confidence, particularly in sort of public settings with other people. I mean, I guess to some extent I probably have a fairly mild version of social anxiety, where it's not that I don't know what to say, it's not that I'm not a sociable person, but because there was that gap where I shut everything down, I missed out on that sort of natural practice and growth. And the lack of confidence really stems from not being me, or not being able to be me in the majority of the kind of parts of my life.
Because you are a confident person. I think I'd say if within our four walls, if you like, we could easily say I lack confidence and you're quite confident. But it's actually the minute that we step out, as you say, it's having that practice, having the shoes nicely worn to that you slip on to help you, one, deal with society and deal with kind of life's kind of day-to-day things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing. As over the years, I probably spent a fair bit of time, kind of in a different way to you, I guess. It's interesting how different people will react to difficult situations in different ways. But I think I almost went the other way, where I became quite belligerent about my core self-belief and wanted to guard it and make sure that it was intact. But I guarded it so much that I almost forgot to share it with other people. And it kind of became a thing for me and a thing for me alone. And because of my experiences, I suppose I sort of figured that if I shared it with people, that it would be picked apart, or that somehow it would be that I'd feel even more vulnerable, or just that I'd lose. It's really difficult to explain. That it would just become something else, and so I spent years and years knowing myself fairly well, knowing who I was. I mean, I can now talk about my emotional side, but I've always known that. I kind of know who I am in my heart of hearts, but I never knew how to show that to the world. And even close family and friends really, even now, probably only get...
But they don't really know you.
Well, they might know me, but it's sort of a half-powered version of who I am, because I think it's become a habit of mine to keep things under wraps, because my formative years, a lot of the experiences were negative and had a profound impact on me. And I think that sort of sense of not belonging is all pervasive.
So how do you match that intrinsically knowing yourself and not feeling like you belong? Is that something that you're working towards, or is there just a level of acceptance now with you just don't feel like you're ever going to meet that I belong feeling?
Yeah, I'd say I'm used to not belonging. It's not really something I focus on all that often anyway. It's just there in the background. I mean, it was a big thing when I was younger, particularly when you're at school, university, that kind of thing. It mattered more. It doesn't matter as much now, and I can see how it's molded the way that I think, the way I am, in ways that are positive as well as negative. I think my journey now is more to find that part of me that is fairly self-confident. I think I know myself quite well. And again, maybe I wouldn't have got to this position of knowing myself if I hadn't have been through all of that, and the not belonging. And I've had to do a lot of self-analysis and looking into who I really am, and at least trying to preserve that for a future date when I'm able to show it to more people.
I think that's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking I spent so many years trying to mould myself in that my root of conviction being, I don't think I'm good enough, meant that I try to overachieve in the sense of belonging, if you like, where I'd mould and I'd try to really understand how people were feeling and then mirror it or respond to it just so that I could feel good enough, that I could feel special.
Yeah.
So, but by having that and constantly looking at how to play off someone else meant that I didn't actually explore who I was. I was too busy belonging. But yeah, I wonder if that's given you some level of, as you say, insight to yourself that I haven't managed to achieve, because I did have a sense of belonging, albeit a kind of aesthetic one, like superficial.
Yeah. I think as well, what it's taught me over sort of many, many years is that focusing too much, I mean, it might be common sense to a lot of people, but focusing too much on that root conviction, and particularly on mine, just doesn't serve me well. I accept it's impacted me. I accept that it's there, and it kind of wheedles its way into all sorts of parts of my life. But to keep focusing, like you were saying with yours, and feeling not good enough, I think it doesn't serve anyone to keep that as a frame of reference and to keep trying to bounce back from that, or trying to do the opposite, if I spent all of my time trying to belong, I'd never get anywhere, because I think it's now intrinsically part of who I am, and that's okay. It makes me different. It makes me unique. And I can't say that I've fully embraced that side of things yet. But I think that's something that I look forward to being able to do over the next few years, is to go from acceptance to sort of embracing it and making the most of it. Because yeah, the not belonging caused me a lot of difficulties when I was younger, but actually the benefits or the parts of my personality I think that I've been able to strengthen, or that have I suppose been enhanced because of those experiences, are things that I quite like in myself. So yeah, it's but as I say, it's just trying to find a way of bringing that inner confidence out, and that's just the next step, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we've in future episodes, obviously, we're hoping to talk about the behaviours that are manifested because of the root conviction, and I suppose maybe that's more the focus for you, is it, in terms of the things that you do day to day that do have a negative impact because of the root conviction, feeling like that you don't belong, but actually they serve no purpose, because if you've accepted that root conviction to a certain degree, then actually those behaviours that have come from it could also be either managed or neutralised or just completely mitigated altogether. But I also remember though when we were trying to kind of work out, if you like, I managed to work out and identify that my root conviction is not feeling good enough during some therapy a couple of years ago. But when we were talking it through and saying, okay, if we're thinking about self-enrichment and how we can be more ourselves, and I think both of us are, I think to a certain degree, maybe you more than me, we're kind of the empaths that can pick up if some people just aren't being themselves. We can tell, you're not really being you, and what might hold people back and what holds us back from being ourselves, etc., etc. You were saying how it wasn't just where mine is a foundation level, all pervading, not feeling good enough, and it really determines quite a lot of different behaviours. You felt that the not belonging wasn't the sum total of the root conviction, and actually mentioned something about not feeling safe, which in a way kind of feeds in quite well to not belonging. But what did you mean by not feeling safe as being another root conviction that other behaviours have come from?
Well, yeah, I suppose in a way it might be related, but I think it's its own thing too. I mean, I've still not untangled all of that, but I think the not being safe is definitely there in the background. I think that probably drives more of the negative side of things in my life, perhaps, than the not belonging does. A lot of that stems from, again, childhood. And
do you have a memory of the first time you didn't feel safe?
Well, I think it probably is just that combination of being a particularly sensitive child and things changing a lot. So, as I said before, going to school, not really understanding the language, not fitting in. I suppose that's where they kind of cross-link a little bit. That not fitting in and not understanding what's going on, and obviously a lot of the turmoil in terms of war and everything that was going on in Iraq, and being able to really easily pick up on how it seemed to affect the people around me, my parents, family members. Yeah,
so it wasn't necessarily, because on paper anyone would go, well, of course he doesn't feel safe. Of course as a kid he didn't feel safe. Look at everything he was dealing with. But yeah, you're right. You had that added. Even if the adults were trying their best to be calm and give you that security,
which they were,
you had the empathetic sensitivity trait, which meant that you were like, cut the bullshit, because I can actually tell how you're feeling, and that's adding to my lack of feeling safe and that my insecurity.
Yeah, and I think also. And my parents in particular really did do their best to shelter me and my younger brother from the effects of the wars, and then subsequently our move over to the UK, because I mean they were going through hell.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of the natural empath in me, but the natural the sensitivity that I had meant that I could always read behind
So did you have a lack of trust because of it? Even though they were trying and you could tell they were trying, as a kid, you didn't believe them, and therefore...
No, it wasn't a lack of belief. It was I suppose if you had to be reductive about it, it would be more of I know they're doing their best. I know they're saying the right things, but I know that's not the truth. I know that's not the whole truth anyway. I know that they're doing this for a reason. So where I guess some other people in that situation, children, might have just been reassured, that was it, left it there. I had the kind of the double whammy of I'm hearing them reassure me. I feel bad that they have to reassure me, and I feel bad that I'm not accepting it at face value because I know that they're worried or scared. And I think once that sets in, it's really difficult to discharge that. And it's very easy to go through life kind of carrying that with you. And for me...
So have you gone through kind of adolescence, late teens, 20s, 30s, continuing with that, I don't feel safe, and it's just come out in different ways, like towards others, people that you don't know, people that you do know, where there's just not a lack of trust, because I think you're trusting, actually. You try to be, and you're quite optimistic, but that... Okay, I should just ask, how does not feeling safe play out as an adult?
Well, for me, it's, I suppose, and I'm sure you'd agree, a lot of it is anxiety-based. So I think, as you say, I think I do trust people on the whole. I'm not somebody who goes around just assuming that everyone's out to, screw me over or whatever. I just don't think that way, because I am by nature quite optimistic and always look forward. But I think that when you carry that with you and when you haven't found a good way of dealing with it, it has to come out somehow. And I suppose this goes back to, again, childhood. And it's no slight on my parents, but they didn't encourage talking about our feelings or letting stuff out or having an outlet of any sort. They're both very pragmatic people, and they dealt with their feelings internally, didn't really show them on the outside. So I think, again, not having an outlet for some of that pent-up stuff meant that it just escaped in the form of anxiety, which is also something that kind of runs in the family as well, Joy. But that's how it manifested itself in the end, I guess, from my teenage years onwards. And it's probably been the biggest ongoing battle that I've had, really. And it comes and goes a bit, but there's always a level of it there. Just because, I suppose, again, I've not quite managed to find life on my terms yet. And when I do that, perhaps all of this will disappear and, everything will be perfect. But, I think that's why it's there. And as I think you said before, I'm sure in future episodes I might go into a bit more depth about it, how it shows itself, because it shows itself in all sorts of interesting and wonderful ways.
So you do, because obviously, yes, you're trusting, but there is an element where you will get more angry than I do. Kind of like I've got this level of acceptance of basically people not being very professional or not doing a good job or trying to pull a fast one, it still riles me, but you actually get quite angry about it. Like, and even on, huge scale things like, let's talk about when mad cow disease was around and you'd have that stupid politician who made his child eat a burger, and you watched that and you knew that he shouldn't have been doing it and it was a wrong thing, or other things where people have just, cowboy builders or whatever it might be, you really take it quite seriously, where people just aren't looking after others or are doing things that they know they shouldn't be doing, but basically take the piss with it. Like I said, it riles me, but I move on quite quickly, whereas you actually hold it. Is that part of the safety thing?
I suppose it is, but I think I could pretty confidently say that side of me or that way of seeing things, it is a lifelong thing. I mean, I remember being a child and feeling similar things. I mean, I can't think of specific examples, but feeling that kind of childhood naive way of thinking where you sort of think, well, everyone should just do their best and be honest and look after each other. And I think because of what happened after that, and because of the upheaval, and I don't think that side of me ever really left me. Maybe in a lot of people, you start off that way, and then as you grow older, you become a little bit more cynical and a bit more world weary, and perhaps that evolves over time. But I think in me, it's always been there, and so I do feel very sort of indignant about things that perhaps other people would just leave or just accept, because it's it could be anything. It could be the examples you gave, or social responsibility, or whatever it might be. Does that stem from not feeling safe? I don't know. It's a bit of a difficult one.
Maybe it contributes to a certain degree. I don't know. That is being on guard.
It's I suppose going back to what we started off with at the beginning, I suppose it contributes to feeling out of step with the kind of the prevailing opinion or attitude or whatever it might be. So I suppose there's that. But again, it's one of these funny things where I actually don't really mind the fact that I think that way, but it's just hard when you're going against the grain constantly. And I sort of always feel like I have done. And I mean, it's probably going to be a lifelong thing. And hopefully I'll discover new ways of feeling a little bit more secure in that, and making more of it, without feeling like I'm some sort of weird ogre or something for having these opinions, or even feeling stupid. I mean, that's something I probably feel a fair bit, that I'm a bit stupid for being so naive and idealistic. And
so you question your response, or
yeah, I suppose. Well, no, I'm confident that that's how I feel, and that's okay for me. But again, because I feel out of step, there's always that part of me that feels I need to question it. That's become a sort of a thing that's kind of grafted into my brain, where I might feel fairly confident in an opinion or how I feel, but then there's that sort of extra artificial voice that says, "Yeah, but would anyone else do this?" And then it just muddies the waters, and I get lost.
I think that's fair enough. I have to admit, I've sometimes seen that happen.
I know. Yeah, it is what it is. I don't know.
Well, we're going to go in, and so in future episodes, we've now talked through, and thank you so much for listening so far. We've talked through 3 kind of main core convictions between us: not feeling good enough, not belonging, and not feeling safe. And whilst we can talk through those experiences that we had, particularly from childhood, which have ultimately formed those root convictions, and anyone could say, completely understand why those root convictions are there, they still unfortunately can hold us back from realising our true selves. And it's not just there's a root conviction that runs in parallel, and we constantly, like I might be constantly saying, "Oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough." It's not really that straightforward. It's the way those root convictions manifest themselves into daily behaviours, and they're those daily behaviours, those ways that Maz and I kind of approach life and deal with life are going to be explored in future episodes. And it would be really great if you've listened to these, kind of us presenting these 3 and kind of talking through what ours are, if they've struck a chord, or if it's helped you to identify, or even if you've already known what your root conviction is and you kind of just want to put it out there, share it with us, ask us questions about it, or just pose kind of what you think might hold you back, then please put them on the comments, and we'd love to kind of just talk through whatever you share in a future episode. We'd really appreciate that, because as we've said right from the outset, we're hoping that this podcast series is something that can just kind of a sharing and kind of community and basically striving for that sense of true self and being able to achieve it. So please do just share any comments or thoughts that you might have under this or any of the previous podcast episodes. We look forward to sharing some of our lovely behaviours that we have. Promise it's not going to be too negative, but I think it's important that we explore them, don't we?
I think we need to start with that to kind of have a bit of a platform so that everyone out there can understand where we're coming from a bit better, so that we're, what we might say subsequently isn't just coming out of the blue.
Exactly.
We have experienced all this stuff, and
sharing is caring.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, have an amazing rest of the day, whatever's left of it. I don't know what time you're listening, but thank you so much for listening to this. And please do catch up with the other episodes if you haven't heard them before. Like I said, share any thoughts that you have in the comments, and we will be with you another time soon. Thanks.
Bye.